Sitra Achra is getting its nourishment from Kedusha. Number 10, Makif Shalamayim Mishtalshalus.
Makif, the light is above, like Seder Socials.
So that's the infinite light. Soviv Kolam. Number 11, Noitlin Chelik Baruch. They take a portion ahead of everyone else. Remember what that is about? It's not that common, but it definitely is common, so it's good to know the phrase. It means that he was saying that if a Yid does an Aveira or does Aveiras, and by doing that, he also can get chayis from Klippa. Klippa will give him chayis, but not only will they give him chayis, they'll actually give him more chayis than everybody else. Because by him doing Aveiras, they're able to get their nourishment from Kedusha, and that gives them so much more strength. So therefore, they have invested interest that he should continue doing what he's doing, so they give him more chayis. Yeah.
And that's why Jews are so successful, like all over the world.
When you look around and you see Yidden that are not with Torah, with mitzvahs, and yet they're very successful, that's the answer. It's Yafi. Yeah, I left on my desk. You see, I left a bunch of envelopes with names on it for the teachers. One of them is for the teachers there. They're coming today? Oh, so, okay. So everything else can wait, yeah.
Can we read number 4, please, and 6?
Number 4 means bedakos. Bedakos means on a finer level. Remember you said that those people that say that Hashem, Ozav Hashem et Hashemayim et Haaretz, Hashem abandoned the world, that's outright Avodah Zarah. Those that say that it's like the waiter, that's Avodah Zarah more bedakos. See, the word bedakos is used in different areas, but it means more refined, more subtle, not so pronounced, not just in such a coarse way. And number, which other one?
6.
6, Bali Bechira, means people that have free choice. Bechira, Bali Bechira, people that have free choice.
Thank you.
Number 12, La'achrei Habirur. What is beer in the tzitzis? What is beer all about?
After Shviras HaKelim?
After Shviras HaKelim would be La'achrei HaShvira. What's La'achrei HaBirur?
The collection.
Collecting what? Stamps? Sparks. It's actually not collecting. The word birur means to choose, to extract. So remember the point he made was that when Mashiach comes and all the sparks will be taken away from Klippa, then Klippa won't exist anymore. Because they only exist because there's a godly spark in them. So La'achrei birur means after all the netzutzos are elevated. Number 13 and 14. I know this was a little bit of a hard one, so I'll explain it again. 13 and 14 this is related to the story of Rabbi Akiva, where Rabbi Akiva said, look, if Hashem is giving so much to those that violate his will, how much more so for those that fulfill his will? Because everyone in the class was asking the question, so it comes out that people who do Aveiros get so much more than people who don't. Because people who don't do Aveiros, true, they get the Ur Pnimi, they get Hashem's light, it's internal, but it's measured and it's limited. And those who get from Makiv, it's unlimited. So the answer is no, when Mashiach comes, we're also going to get from Makiv. On the contrary, we're going to get from the Pnimius of the Makiv, which means it will be unlimited in a much greater unlimited way. So basically, both are makif. One is the external part of the makif, one is the pnimis of makif. And if you want to understand this in a simpler way, makif, which one of the person's faculties is the mashal for makif? Chachma, Bina, Das, which one?
Above. That.
What? No. You have 10 choices.
Malchus.
No.
Bina.
It's not Chachma, it's not Bina, it's not Das, it's not Chesed. What?
Oh.
I can't hear.
Oh.
Or?
Gvura.
Not Gvura, not Or.
Tiferes.
Not Tiferes.
Not
It's something above. No, it's just a.
Keter, no?
It's not. It's a trick question.
So what is above?
So nothing.
Oh, Mazel Tov.
Oh,
Shvu Shatei Mitzlachas. Okay. Ratzon. Ratzon is above the 10 spheres. In different language, it's Keser. But in the faculties of a person, it's Ratzon. In fact, Ratzon has no place in the body. It's everywhere. Seichel is in the head. Midos in the heart. The power to see is in the eyes. The power, but where's Ratzon? Ratzon is not limited to any place. It maybe registers in the head, but any part of the body that I have a Ratzon to move my leg, to move my toes, to move my eyes, to move my mouth, to do this, that, Ratzon is everywhere. So Ratzon is the example that's usually used for Seir Kalam, for Makif, for the that is not limited. But in Ratzon, there are two returns. There's a Primus Ratzon and there's Chitzenis Ratzon. Remember we said, there's certain things that I want because I really want them, the Primus. Other things, I only want them as a means to an end. So if a person wants to work very hard because he gets paid a good salary, but he wants the money, he doesn't want the hard work. And a person that wants the money doesn't really want the money, he wants the benefits of the money, to be able to live comfortable. And that each Ratzon is premium compared to the next Ratzon. So, in general, Hashem has a Ratzon for this world. The Ratzon for Klippa, for Sitra Achra, for evil, and all these negative things in the world is Hashem's Ratzon, but it's Chitzoni's Ratzon. Doesn't really want it. On the contrary, Hashem despises all these things. Then there's Pnimis Ratzon, and that's Torah and mitzvahs and kedusha and yidden and so forth.
So Pneumius Ratzon is God's internal will.
Internal will, yep.
And it's like facing God. Like, yeah, it's like facing Hashem.
Right, his true will. Number 15, command the B'shadi Basar Katfe. This is very common, very, very common. So who knows what it means? It's Aramaic. I'll tell you the definition of the words, and you will explain it. The definition is it's like, command means like, shadi, throwing something, basar katfe, behind your shoulder.
The bad things, like from Pinat Horan,
Right. That's another way of describing chitzenis haratzon. When you're giving something, but you really don't want to give it. So you turn your back and you just give it to whoever you have to give it to. That's when you're doing it reluctantly. You don't want to.
Wait. So Pneumius Ratzon is God's internal will. What's number 14?
What's what?
Number 14.
That's Hashem's external will. Chitzenis haratzon. Yes.
So 15, like if you do a mitzvah and you're not doing it with your heart, does that apply to that? Like you're just throwing it if you're reluctant?
It's also true. I mean, when we use the term, we don't use it for that.
Oh,
Usually the term implies talking about klipa, that Hashem gives klipa like a person gives somebody behind his back. And that's why we use the term Elokim Acherim, Hashem's back. But of course, yes, if a person does something reluctantly, doesn't really want to do it, he's also it's chitoni saratz. And maybe the reason why we don't use it is because even though consciously the person doesn't want to do it, but subconsciously his real will and desire is to do it. Number 16, b'chinas golus.
Exile? Or godless work?
Right, the God exiles in exile. We're explaining that means that even after all the tzimtzumim and all the changes, the godly spark finally goes into something which is klipa. When it's in there, it doesn't become one with it, it's in exile there. It's like two separate things. Like the analogy is given in Chassidus, like a person who would be in a sack. So even though he's in the sack and the sack is moving, but the sack never became a person and the person never became a sack. They're two separate things. So the godly spark in Klippa, even the little tiny bit that's there is in Golus. Doesn't really become part of it. Okay, I think this covers what we already did. And now we'll move on. Okay. I also want to show you that in this booklet, on page 49 and on, is a summary of each chapter. So you look there, you can see the flow of the Maimon. So now we're doing Zion. So let's start with Zion. And do you mind if you do this? Are you read it?
No.
Thank you. So Zion, in this Ma'amar B'Yom Hashtei Asar, we are on page 200 and 229. I was going to start something new, and he's going to explain. The last thing he explained was that there's really two things. One is where the Yid makes a logical, comes to a logical conclusion to choose Hashem over everything else. And that is because he thinks everything else is temporary. Hashem is permanent. So that shows that everything is not emes, and I want emes. So it's for a good reason, but he's getting there through a thought process, which is logic. The other explanation was that it's deeper than logic. It's beyond logic. It's just a neshama thing. Chelki havaya omra nafshi. My soul says, Hashem, you're my portion, which means it's inconceivable to me to think of anything else, whether it's more or less, it doesn't matter. You are connected to me, I'm connected to you, I can't think of anything else. So that means it's not logical. So the Rebbe explained, both are true. Really, a Yid chooses Hashem because that's his essence. But because he has that essence connection, therefore it makes sense. If you wouldn't have that, then the logic would never lead to that conclusion. Okay, so now we understand why, even though it makes sense, you still need to be backed up by the essential connection. What about the reverse? If I have an essential connection to Hashem, why do I even have to bring in logic? Why do I have to approach it with a logical explanation? Just choose Hashem because he's Hashem. So he's going to explain that even though every Yid has this connection to Hashem, because my essence, the Hashem essence is one, but the fact that I'm able to think about it in a seichelic way, and I make the choice also with seichel, that means that will deepen my connection with Hashem. Not weaken it, but deepen it. And this is really what we're going to learn here in a certain sense. It's almost like the essence of the whole approach of Chabad. Because in other Hasidic circles, they're very much against learning in depth Chassidus. Just approach it with Amunah, and that's it. Don't go so much into understanding. They thought the more you use your seichel, you're at risk of deviating, of getting lost, of God forbid, trusting your seichel, and then you make the wrong conclusions. In Chabad, the Alter Rebbe explains the opposite, that when you understand Hashem with seichel, it deepens your emunah, not weakens your emunah. Okay, ready to go? Okay, fasten your seatbelts. This is a little bit more than before, but we can handle it. Perhaps we can add. We know when the Rebbe says perhaps, for us, as far as we're concerned, it's not a perhaps, it's an absolute certainty. That what? The fact that the choice, which is really above seichel, is being channeled through seichel, through logic. This will add something greater. It elevates the soul to a loftier rung than its natural inherent level. Page 230. How is that? This will be understood by first prefacing. One of the sources, the big sources on this big question about how is it that those who are evil and do bad things, they get a lot of chayas, is in the siddur. Now, besides the siddur that we use every day, there's a siddur which Alter Rebbe has maimarim on the margin of the siddur. So it's a siddur, and all around is maimarim. So one of the maimarim starts with the words Avodim Hayinu Lefar b'Mitzrayim. And over there it explains that the divine, the ba'in hashpa and nemsheches la'ivir etzeinai, gives a mashal to the fact that Hashem gives sustenance to those that violate His will. Shurak b'derech agav, that Hashem does it in a way which is sort of by the way. That's not really His intention. He doesn't do it willingly; it's reluctantly. Command the shada. Here's the term again. Command the shada b'tekatve. Like someone who throws what he gives to another over his shoulder. I told you that even, when you think of it on a very simple level, when you're talking to somebody that you appreciate the relationship, you're facing them, you're looking them in the face and the eyes, and you talk. When you're talking to someone that you don't appreciate this, and especially if you have to give them something you really don't want to, you look away, you look to the side. It's the same idea as turning your back. You're not able to face them. So, what's the mashal? There's a king, and the king is making a suda, making a big meal, and he's making the meal for the avodim, the servants. These are the words. It's a very specific word, so we'll soon see why it's specific. It's for the Sarim Agdelim, the big ministers, the prominent ministers, Ba'avodim Achshuvim, and the prestigious servants. What does it mean, prestigious servants? It means there are certain servants working in a palace that their function is more prestigious than others. In other words, some of them are there, let's say, they come into the king's chamber, they take things from the king, they bring things to the king. Some of them bring the king his mail. Okay, these are servants that are doing something which is more prestigious. Then there are servants who are just working in the courtyard of the king. They don't really even connect to the king himself. They're doing things that are simple things. And he really gives out. He gives out a lot. He has tremendous expenses, which means he spends a lot of money for this big suda that he wants to make. There's leftovers of the meal. The leftovers, everyone else also benefits. Even those people that are working in the palace that are on a lower level, they also, who are the ones on the lower level, like servants, those that are behind the millstones. In other words, they're doing technical, physical work. They're not really connected in any sort of way to the king. So if there's a big meal, a big feast, and the king ordered tons and tons of meat and food and all sorts of gourmet meals and things, and everybody's enjoying it, but there's a lot of leftovers because it's done on a scale of a king. So for the leftovers, anybody who hangs around in the palace will benefit. Not only the humans, But even the dogs, they'll eat the bones that are thrown down on the floor. So now that there's a bigger meal, there's more bones. So even the dogs are enjoying it. Now, remember, the king spent millions of dollars, let's say, on this big party, like the party Achashverosh made. Certainly, when the king made this feast and he spent all these millions of dollars, he didn't spend the money for them. The fact that they have the leftovers, and even the leftovers of such a feast, of such a king, is going to be in abundance, going to be a lot, and it's also going to be very valuable. But it's rak b'derech hagav. By the way, there's also leftovers. But the king didn't make this meal, so the dog should have more bones. And he didn't make the meal, so the simple servants and the simple maids should have this extra food. He made it for the important, prestigious servants and for the officers, the ministers, for the people who are in a higher caliber, people who have on a higher level. That's the mashal. Now let's look into the nimshal. There's about nimshal. Same thing with the nimshal. Of course, the king is Hashem, and the suda, the meal, the feast. This is the hashpah, the sustenance that Hashem gives to the world. Those people who violate Hashem's will, they're also getting something, but what they're getting is, by the way, that Hashem's intention in giving all the hashpah in the world is not for them. In fact, Hashem is giving it reluctantly. Like a person who throws it over his shoulder. The way it's explained at length in that mimer from the Alter Rebbe. So we know whenever there's a mashal, the mashal is not only a good example in general, but even the details of the mashal are precise. So the Rebbe is going now into explaining a little bit more about the details of the mashal. In the mashal he brings two examples of those that hashpah lehem b'derech agav. There are two examples of people that they get hashpah by the way, not intentional. And these are those that don't sit by the king's table. Who is that? Avodim ushvaches aklovim. Servants and maids is one category, and the dogs are another category, which means the servants and the maids, they don't really associate with the king himself. They might work for the palace, but they're not connected to the king himself. They're not the ones who are going to sit down by the table together with the king. They have it in the kitchen downstairs. They'll also have some food. And of course, the dogs. But then the shtei digmois, and there's two examples of those that are in a higher class and they sit with the king by the table. Who are they? Sarim G'dolim, the prominent officers, and means, I don't know whether you use officers or ministers, Ba'avadim Chshuvim, and the important, prestigious servants. Just like in the mashal, there are four categories. In the nimshal, there's also four categories. This is parallel to the four levels in the nimshal. The nimshal being Hashem and the world. The lowest level are the dogs. Why the dogs? The dogs don't serve the king. They only have one motivation. Their desire is, in other words, talking about sort of people that would be compared to a kelev, that their desire is just they want hashpah for themselves. Oid v'oid. As it says, haklovim azei nefesh. The dogs are fiercely wanting. They know no satiation. Nothing satisfies them. They want more and more and more and more. Something which is known, and we were fortunate to learn about this in the previous mimer, that the word kelev is the word kulei lev, it's all heart. The dog has no intention, it means a person who is only this, he has no intention in serving Hashem. All he wants is to have whatever it is would make him happy. And therefore, this person would go into that category. that it's all heart. What does it mean, all heart? Teva, or the metodosai, the way Hashem created a person, naturally, is that mayach shalat alalev. We all have the power that the mind and the brain controls the heart. So therefore, this person that we are saying and drawing a parallel between him and a kelev, who is at the other end of the spectrum completely, which means if the brain controls the heart, that's the way it's supposed to be. If the brain doesn't control the heart, that's not good. If the heart controls the brain, that's really bad. But a kelev is even worse than that. Kulilev, not only that the heart controls the brain, there is no brain. It's all heart, all emotion. There's nothing else except for desire. I want.
How'd you spell kalav in Hebrew?
What?
How'd you spell kalav in Hebrew?
Chaf,
Yeah.
lamed, beis. It was a mashpia in France. I mean, he passed away already many years, but he was a person that could be the Friedrich Rebbe said, but it was a known thing that everyone thought of him, that he's a Beinim of Tanya. His name was Rabbi Nissen Nemenov. He was a mashpia in France, a very big chassid, but he was a mashpia of Bochum. So this Bochum once told me that he wanted to go somewhere, do something. He was 15, 16 years old. And he tells this mashpia, in Yiddish, ich will, which means I want to do this and this. So he says, what's his ich and what's his will? What do you mean ich? Who's ich? And what is want? What do you mean you want? But that's kulei lev, all heart. I want. That's a kelev, nothing else. So lachen in Yanehu l'manas taibes liben. So this is a person that's not interested in serving Hashem. His interest is just to fulfill his own desires. So that's the lowest level. Then there's above that level, which are avodim apchusim, which means we're calling them avodim, they're servants, which means they do serve the king. But they're a lower level. And this is what he says in the mashal, avodim ashvacha shachar echayin, they're behind the millstones, which means they do technical work. But they are, they're still serving the king. So why are we saying they're on a lower level? They're serving the king only out of compulsion, which means they're afraid they'll be punished, and therefore they follow what the king says. But they do follow what the king says, which means what they're doing is it goes contrary to what they want. They would rather do other things, but because they're afraid that if they don't do what the king wants them to do, they're going to be punished, so they do what the king says. Because Abda Befkera Nichale, page 234, there's an expression in Gemara. In general, when you use the term Eved, which means a slave, or more than just a servant, the Gemara says this, these people who were slaves, they were in general very low-class people. Like the Rambam writes, we're learning, not long ago, we were learning halachas about buying and selling, and it talks about what happens if you buy something from someone, and it's not exactly what you thought it was. Does the guy have to return the money or not? And there's a whole long list of examples when you do have to return the money, when you don't have to return money. And I remember one of the halachas was if a person would buy a slave and he finds out that he steals or does other things which are inappropriate, and he comes back to the master and he says to the guy who sold him, and says, this was a mistake, I want my money back. The Rambam says he doesn't have to give the money back. Because all the people in that category they're low-class people, and they're all known to be these kind of people. So this is a person that the Gemara says, Abda Befkera Nichale, which means he wants to be Hefker. You know what Hefker means? In the dorm, I think everybody in the dorm knows what Hefker means. Hefker means something that has no balabas, nothing on top of them, no one owns it, and therefore, just like with clothing, if it's Hefker, you can do whatever you want with it. If I'm hefker, means I can do whatever I want. That's the nature of an eved. He has no sense of responsibility. He doesn't really recognize a higher authority, but he still listens because he doesn't want to be punished. So Makev and Sharat Samatanik Shalahem, being that his true desire and his true pleasure is really taivas elam hazeh, is worldly matters, physical, materialistic pleasures. The fact that they don't violate Hashem's will is only yiras therefore punishment. Therefore, that's why in the mashal, these are the people that are not sitting by the king's table, because they're serving the king, but not reluctantly, and not because of any real reason. So we have two categories. One category is Keleb. These are people who don't serve the king altogether because all they're interested in is just their taivas, and therefore they'll do whatever they want. The second category is they do what the king wants, but not for the real reason, just because of punishment. So these are the two categories that are not sitting by the king's table. Then there's two categories that are sitting by the king's table. Begashmias, and let's see what it represents, Baruchnis. And then there are the prestigious servants, which means they serve the king willingly. They serve the king with a desire. Even though, generally speaking, in Chassidus, and especially we find this in Tanya, in chapter 41, the famous chapter, the difference between a ben and an eved. Let's say the son of a king or the servant of a king. The servant of a king, let's start with the other side. The son of a king is somebody who is a prince, and therefore he understands the greatness of the king. He understands his greatness in terms of his kingdom, and greatness in terms of his seichel and his midas and his Torah and his ruchnias. And therefore, when he serves his father, the king, it's with awe and love because he understands his greatness. Like you think, for example, of the Rabbeim. The Mittel Rebbe towards the Alter Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek towards the Alter Rebbe, or the Rebbe Marash towards his father, or the Friedrich Rebbe towards his father. They knew the greatness of the king, and they served him in that way because they knew the greatness. An Eved, a servant, is somebody who is just a servant. He doesn't understand the greatness, but he has Kabbalah Seir. He knows this is the king, and he enjoys doing what he's doing, but not so much because he understands the greatness, just because he's dedicated and loyal. His dedication and loyalty. So he says, Hagam Kabbalah Seir, even though a servant is someone who serves Hashem with Kabbalah Seir, which means accepting the king's yoke, and then in the bracket, okay, you do as it's known, the difference between a son and a servant. When a son carries out his father's will, it is because of his love. He actually has love for his father because he understands the greatness. A servant carries out his master's will, it's Kabbalah service, dedication, loyalty, not so much the feeling of love or understanding, it's just, I'm a dedicated servant, and I do what I'm told to do. But nevertheless, this kind of serving the king, the way he serves the king with Kabbalah Seir, is beratzon v'cheshek. He still does it willingly, which means he wants to have Kabbalah Seir. And therefore, he sits by the king's table. It means he's connected to the king. Yeah.
So when we sing Avinu Malkeinu, like we're supposed to have the relationship with Hashem that we're both as Avin and
Right.
as child.
Right. We're supposed to have Kabbalah Seir and also the Abba, like a ben to a father.
But the difference between the prestigious servant and the other Avin is the other Avin just does whatever the king says because he's afraid he's going to get kicked out of the palace. But this one wants to serve.
Right. Right.
But this Avin is the one who knows the greatness of the king and he wants that proposal?
No, he knows that it's a king, but he doesn't understand the greatness of the king to the point that he should have the love for the king. But he's dedicated and loyal.
So the Kabbalah that we should have is that we want to have Kabbalah, not that we just do Kabbalah because we're afraid that.
Right. You might remember a story that I told you earlier in the year that there was a chassid who was traveling somewhere, and I don't remember the details, but he was, I think, traveling and he passed a fort of soldiers. And he saw that they were disciplining a certain soldier. Somebody was whipping him. And apparently they were there together with one of the officers, people in charge. And they asked him, what happened to this soldier? Why was he being whipped? So he said, because he was supposed to be guarding the fort at night. And his feet froze from the cold. They took him to the hospital. And now that he came back, home, he's getting his punishment that his feet froze at night. Punishment because his feet froze? So he said, yeah, the one who was beating him was saying, if you would have remembered the oath you gave to the king that you're going to serve him loyally, then your feet would have not frozen. That should have warmed you up. What does it mean? It means to say that when he gave this oath, I'm going to be loyal to the king and I'm going to be dedicated to the king, it also comes with the love, with the feeling of that I want, not love, the desire, I want to do this. This is my passion. I want to serve the king and I want to be loyal and dedicated to the king. And even though he doesn't understand the greatness, but he understands loyalty, and that should have warmed you up. So he said, I learned from that how to serve Hashem. And even Kabbalah soil is something that has to be with desire, with will. Well, the Ma'ila Mahem, what's above this level? Then there's the Sarim, the ministers. The ministers are higher. These are Sheyesh Lam Yidib Anogas Hamlucha. Ministers mean people, that they know how to run things in the country. What's a minister? A minister is a person that the king delegates authority to him. He should run a certain part of the country. That's why many things in the country actually are in the hands of the ministers. The king is not even involved in it. The ministers, they make the decisions because they know they are on a much higher level. They have a real understanding of the greatness of the king. And that's why they have a love for the king, because they appreciate and admire his greatness. And they don't serve the king only because Kabbalah Sale, because of dedication and loyalty, but mitzad ava, it's more than just what Kabbalah Sale. Kabbalah Sale means dedication. I'm loyal. Ava is the result of understanding Hashem's greatness, and that generates a tremendous love for Hashem. So therefore, the Sarim are another category. But then the Rebbe says there's also a hint here to another category, because it says Sarim Achshuvim, the important ministers. That means even amongst the ministers there must be levels, some that are more important than others. The Sarim Gufa Yeshna Kama V'Kama Dargas, and amongst the ministers there are many levels. Shenechlokis Bechlolis. So in general, the two levels are Sarim Stam, ordinary ministers, and Sarim Gedalim, and the big ministers. Maybe it means that their responsibility is much, much bigger in Yonim. So now we understand the mashal we had in the beginning of the Maimon. Remember, you said the king comes to a city and he has 3 ministers with him. He called them a parchen, duchsin, istaretelutin. In English, they translate it as a duke, or whatever titles they have. We don't know the titles in the palace. Haven't been in the palace for a while, so I don't know what these titles are. But it's going, according to this, it's corresponding to these 3 levels. One level is the important ministers, the other level is the ordinary ministers, and the third level is the avadim, the prestigious servants that serve the king with Kabbalah Sel and enjoy serving with Kabbalah Sel. And then he's going to go into deeper Persian. Okay, so this part wasn't hard because it's a nice mashal, but later we'll go into a little bit next part. Okay. Tzlacha Rabba, everybody.
But you have to
Wait till next week.
What?
You have to wait till Tuesday?
Till Tuesday.
That's not bad.
No bucks. Yeah.
Imagine 2 shoes right there.
So again, if it's an emergency, you can send me a urgent
I can't do it tonight, but
I'll try to answer the
before
question.
9:30.
Enjoy your vacation.
Thank you, Rabbi Majeski. Wait, who's it? Friday, remember? Yeah. Everyone's going by. Right. And then my friends were brought. I was like, what happened? She's like, I'm not. That's so cool.
Is your friend running?